The small town of Maplewood had always whispered stories about wealth and privilege, but none as unusual as the story of Jonathan Whitmore, a white millionaire who had made his fortune in the city and then disappeared into his sprawling mansion on the hill. People often saw him driving past in his black luxury car, but he never mingled with the town's residents. Children would peek over fences, imagining what kind of life someone like him could possibly have. For most, he was a distant figure, a man of money, mystery, and isolation. But life has a way of surprising people in ways they never expect. Jonathan Whitmore, despite his riches, had always felt a hollowness inside. He had everything: mansions, cars, investments, even a circle of powerful friends. But something essential was missing. Every evening he would sit in his study, staring at the photographs of people he didn't know and the charity events he attended, and feel a quiet ache that not even money could fill. It was during a trip to a crowded orphanage on the outskirts of the city that Jonathan's life began to change. The orphanage was small, worn down, and smelled faintly of damp wood and soap. Children ran about laughing, playing with broken toys, their eyes sparkling with the innocence of youth. Among them was a little girl named Amara. She was small, no older than 6, with big brown eyes that seemed older than her age. Her hair, tightly curled, framed a face that had seen more hardship than anyone should at that age. But what caught Jonathan most was her smile. Bright, honest, and completely fearless, as if the world had not yet taught her to be afraid. Jonathan watched from a distance at first. He noticed the way she helped other children, sharing bits of bread and offering a comforting hand to anyone who seemed sad. There was something about her, a quiet strength wrapped in vulnerability that made his chest tighten. He had always thought he knew what he wanted in life, but looking at her, he realized he didn't know what real love was, what family really meant. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan visited the orphanage often. He spoke to the staff, learned about Amara's story, and listened to the little girl talk about her dreams of becoming a teacher, of painting colorful pictures for everyone in the orphanage, of one day traveling to places she had only seen in books. Jonathan was drawn to her optimism, her courage, and the way she seemed to see beauty in the smallest things. One rainy afternoon, as he sat across from her at the small wooden table in the orphanage's dining room, Amara asked him a question that made his heart ache. "Mr. Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but steady, "why do you care about me? You have so many things already, why me?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He had rehearsed answers in his mind, but none felt right. Finally, he looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Because you remind me of what I've been missing. You remind me that life is more than what I can buy. You remind me of love." From that day on, Jonathan made a decision that shocked everyone when it became known. He wanted to adopt Amara. The news spread quickly through the town. People whispered, some with admiration, others with skepticism. How could a millionaire so different from her take in a little black orphan girl? But Jonathan didn't care about their opinions. He only cared about giving her a life filled with safety, love, and opportunity, a life she had never known. Amara, for her part, couldn't believe it. She had dreamed of a family, of a home, but never thought someone like Jonathan would choose her. On the day she moved into his mansion, she held her small suitcase tightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. Jonathan knelt down, looking into her eyes, and whispered, "I promise you, you will never feel alone again." And for the first time in her life, Amara believed it. Moving into Jonathan's mansion was a dream come true for Amara. But dreams, she quickly learned, often came with shadows. The house was enormous, with rooms so big that her small frame felt swallowed by them. The walls were filled with expensive paintings, the floors with polished marble that echoed every tiny step she took. For a child who had spent her entire life in a crowded, noisy orphanage, this silence was almost deafening. Jonathan tried to make the mansion feel like home. He bought toys, decorated her room with bright colors, and even planted a small garden where she could play. But love, he soon realized, could not erase the invisible walls that fear and mistrust had built inside her. Amara often woke up in the middle of the night, staring at the dark corners of her new room, imagining that shadows could somehow swallow her whole. Jonathan would find her curled under the covers, tears streaking her face, and hold her until she felt safe. Outside the mansion, the world was even harsher. Neighbors whispered when they saw Amara walking with Jonathan, their tones filled with surprise and sometimes judgment. "Is that really his daughter?" they would ask. "Are you sure he can take care of her?" Some children at her new school stared, pointing out that she was different, that she didn't belong. For the first time, Amara felt the sharp sting of being judged not for who she was, but for the color of her skin and the difference in her world. Jonathan watched all of this quietly at first, but the sadness in Amara's eyes pierced him. He realized that love alone was not enough to shield her from the cruelty of the world. He began to teach her how to stand tall, how to respond with kindness but also with courage. "People will not always understand you, Amara," he told her one evening as they sat in the garden. "But that does not mean you are less. It only means the world is not ready for your light yet." Amara listened and tried to believe him, but it was hard. She missed the laughter of the orphanage, the friends who had shared their meager meals with her, and the small but comforting routine of her old life. At times she would run away to the garden, burying her face in the flowers, wishing she could return to a place where she had felt invisible yet safe. Jonathan would find her there, sitting silently among the roses, and simply sit beside her. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes being present, being steady and unwavering, was the only thing that could remind her that she was loved. One afternoon, Amara came home from school with tears in her eyes. Some older kids had mocked her in the cafeteria, calling her names that she did not even understand fully. Jonathan saw her standing in the doorway, her small body trembling, and he ran to her without thinking. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, feeling her sorrow and rage all at once. "I am so sorry, Amara," he whispered. "I know it hurts, but you are stronger than they will ever be. You belong here, and no one can take that away from you." Days turned into weeks, and slowly Amara began to find her place. She discovered the joy of reading in the mansion's grand library, the thrill of painting on large canvases, and the comfort of knowing that someone would always be there to protect her. Yet every day brought a reminder that love alone could not erase the world's judgments. She learned to balance vulnerability with strength, tears with smiles, fear with courage. Through it all, Jonathan never wavered. He celebrated her small victories, wiped away her tears, and reminded her constantly that she was enough. And slowly, very slowly, Amara began to believe it. She began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, a world that had seemed so cold could also hold warmth, if only you had someone to show it to you. As the years passed, Amara grew taller, her laughter grew louder, and her curiosity became impossible to contain. Jonathan watched with pride as the little girl who had once trembled in the corners of his mansion blossomed into a thoughtful, determined young teenager. But adolescence, with its inevitable challenges, brought a new set of struggles that neither money nor love could easily fix. School had always been difficult, but now it became a battlefield of emotions. Teenagers could be cruel in ways adults sometimes forgot. Amara faced whispers in hallways, stares that lingered a little too long, and subtle jabs that made her doubt herself. She began to ask questions Jonathan had never expected. Do people really care about me, or only about the color of my skin? Jonathan felt a pang in his chest every time she asked something like that. He realized that love, no matter how deep, could not shield her from the world's prejudices. One evening, after a particularly rough day at school, Amara ran to Jonathan's study. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the frustration and anger she could no longer contain. "Why did you adopt me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I feel so different, so out of place everywhere I go." Jonathan knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. He felt the weight of her words, knowing they carried not just hurt, but the confusion of a young girl trying to find her place in the world. "I adopted you," Jonathan said softly. Because I saw you, Amara, not your skin, not your past, just you. You are brave, kind, and strong. And yes, the world might try to make you feel small, but that does not mean you are. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Amara looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in his words. For a moment, the anger softened, replaced by the warmth that only Jonathan could provide. Yet, even as she felt comforted, the fear lingered. Fear that the world outside the mansion would never accept her fully. That no matter how much she achieved, she would always be seen as different. Then came the turning point, a school competition in literature. Amara had always loved writing, but she had kept her poems and stories private, fearing judgment. Encouraged by Jonathan, she submitted a story under a pen name, pouring her heart into every line. When the results were announced, she had won first place, not just for her skill, but for the honesty and emotion that poured from her words. The recognition changed something inside her. For the first time, Amara realized that her voice mattered, that her perspective, her experience was valuable. She still faced challenges, still saw prejudice and heard whispers, but now she carried a quiet confidence that refused to be shaken. Jonathan saw it too, the spark in her eyes that had grown brighter over the years. But life had one more test waiting. One evening, a letter arrived from a distant relative who had always questioned Jonathan's decision to adopt Amara. The letter demanded that she be returned to her original family, citing laws and outdated ideas about race and inheritance. Jonathan read it quietly, his hands tightening around the paper. He looked at Amara, whose eyes were wide with fear. "Do they want to take me away?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he could. "No one can take you away," he said firmly. "You are my daughter. You have always been my daughter, and I will fight for you with everything I have." That night, as they sat together in the grand library, Jonathan and Amara realized something essential. Love alone could survive hatred and fear, but it required courage. And together they vowed that no one, no challenge, no injustice, would ever break the bond they had built over years of trust, tears and laughter. In that quiet moment, Amara understood that her life, once uncertain and fragile, had been transformed by someone willing to see her for who she truly was, and she promised herself that she would never let the world make her doubt that again. The letter from the distant relative hung over the mansion like a dark cloud. For the first time, Amara felt the weight of her unusual life pressing down on her, making her question everything she had grown to love and trust. The idea that someone could challenge her place in Jonathan's home shook her to the core. She had already survived so much loneliness, prejudice, and fear, and now, at the age of 14, she faced another threat to the life she had fought to accept as her own. Jonathan, however, did not falter. That night he called his lawyer and began preparing for a fight that would test not only the law, but the strength of their bond. "No one," he told Amara firmly, "has the right to take away the family we have built. You are mine, and nothing will change that." His voice was steady, unwavering, and filled with a determination that made Amara's heart ache with gratitude. Despite Jonathan's assurances, the days that followed were tense. Amara struggled with anxiety, finding it hard to focus on school or even enjoy the mansion that had once felt like paradise. At times she hid in the garden, watching the sunlight glint off the flowers, wishing for the simplicity of the orphanage where problems, though many, had been smaller, more contained. Jonathan would often find her there, sitting quietly on the stone bench, her hands buried in her lap. He never forced conversation. Instead, he sat beside her, allowing silence to fill the space with comfort rather than fear. One afternoon, Amara finally spoke. "What if they win, Mr. Jonathan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they tell me I don't belong here?" Jonathan looked into her eyes, seeing the fear she tried to hide, and held her hands firmly in his. "Then we fight," he said simply. "We fight together, and no matter what happens, you are not alone. You are my daughter, and that is forever." The following weeks were a blur of meetings, legal documents, and tense discussions. Amara watched Jonathan pour himself into every detail, never letting the burden break him, never allowing her to feel abandoned. She began to understand the depth of his love, not just as a guardian, but as someone who had chosen her when the world had not. The realization filled her with a fierce gratitude and a growing courage. She wanted to prove that she was worthy of his unwavering faith. One evening, as they sat in the mansion's grand living room, Jonathan handed Amara a small notebook. "I want you to write," he said gently. "Write your story, your feelings, your dreams. Show the world who you really are." Amara took the notebook, her fingers trembling. She began to write, at first slowly, then with growing confidence, pouring her emotions onto the pages. Writing became her refuge, a way to channel her fears into something beautiful and powerful. Then came the hearing. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, filled with strangers whose judgments could have changed the course of her life. Amara sat beside Jonathan, gripping his hand tightly. She was nervous, scared, but also determined. When the judge asked for her thoughts, she spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I belong with him," she said. "He is my father. He has loved me when no one else did. I am not just his daughter on paper. I am his daughter in every way that matters." Jonathan felt tears prick at his eyes. He squeezed her hand, proud beyond words. In that moment, Amara understood something she had never fully grasped before. Love was not passive. It demanded courage, it demanded voice, and it demanded faith. And together, they had all three in abundance. As they left the courthouse victorious, Amara felt a strange mixture of relief and pride. She had faced fear, prejudice, and the threat of losing the only family she had ever known. And she had emerged stronger. Jonathan looked at her, eyes shining, and whispered, "You are my heart, Amara, never forget that." And she never would. Years passed, and Amara grew into a remarkable young woman. She was no longer the quiet, fearful child who had once clutched her suitcase in Jonathan's mansion. She carried herself with confidence, a bright smile, and a heart full of dreams. Her voice, once soft and hesitant, had become strong and inspiring, and those who met her were often struck by the light that seemed to radiate from within. Yet, despite her growth, Amara never forgot the journey that had brought her here. The orphanage, the lonely nights, and the love of the man who had chosen her when the world had not. Jonathan watched her with a mixture of pride and quiet awe. He remembered the tiny girl hiding in the corners of his mansion, unsure if she had a place in the world, and now, here she was, vibrant, capable, and unafraid. He knew that the lessons of resilience, courage, and self-worth had taken root deep inside her. But he also understood that the years had brought challenges that Amara still carried quietly, moments of doubt, reminders of prejudice, and the unspoken question of whether the world would ever truly accept her. It was just days before Amara's 18th birthday, a milestone Jonathan had been planning for years. He wanted it to be more than a celebration. It had to be a declaration of love, belonging, and hope. Invitations were sent, but the focus was not on the grandeur of the party. The true gift would be the words he had been preparing, a message he wanted to share with Amara, one that would reflect the depth of their journey together. Amara spent the day helping with preparations, unaware of the surprise Jonathan had planned. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the mansion, friends and family gathered. The room was filled with laughter, the scent of flowers, and the soft music that Jonathan had chosen just for her. But it wasn't the decorations or the guests that mattered. It was the presence of Jonathan, steady and warm, standing at the center, ready to speak from his heart. When the time came, Jonathan asked everyone to be silent. He turned to Amara, his eyes shining with emotion. 18 years ago, he began, his voice steady but filled with warmth. I met a little girl who had nothing but hope in her heart. She taught me more about love than I had ever known in all my years of wealth and success. She taught me that family is not defined by blood but by the courage to care, to protect and to believe in someone completely. Amara's eyes filled with tears. She had never heard words like this spoken so openly, and the depth of them struck her in a way that left her breathless. Jonathan continued, "Amara, you have grown into a remarkable young woman, strong, kind, and full of light. I chose you when the world had turned its back. I chose you because I saw in you a spirit that deserved love, safety, and a home. And I promise you this, no matter where life takes you, no one can ever take away the bond we share. You are my daughter, and you always will be." The room was silent save for the quiet sobs of those who were moved by the beauty of the moment. Amara ran into Jonathan's arms, holding him tightly as if she could absorb all the love he had given her over the years. In that embrace, every fear, every lonely night, every struggle they had faced together seemed to dissolve, leaving only the unbreakable truth of their connection. For the first time, Amara realized fully what she had always known in her heart. She was loved beyond measure, chosen not out of obligation, but out of the deepest possible devotion. And Jonathan, looking down at the young woman who had become the center of his life, felt a quiet satisfaction that words could never capture. That night, as the celebration faded and the mansion grew quiet, Amara sat with Jonathan in the garden where she had once hidden as a frightened child. They watched the stars together, silent, comfortable, and profoundly connected. It was a moment that marked not just a birthday but a lifetime of love, hope, and the incredible journey that had brought them together. In that quiet night, Amara whispered, "Thank you for everything." Jonathan smiled, holding her close. "No, my dear. Thank you for letting me be your father." The morning after Amara's 18th birthday dawned bright and golden, but in the Whitmore mansion, the day felt almost sacred. Jonathan had planned something special, something that would make Amara understand in a way words alone could not convey, the depth of his love and pride. He wanted her to see how far she had come, not just as a young woman, but as someone who had transformed his life as profoundly as he had transformed hers. Amara awoke to the soft light streaming through her window, feeling the quiet thrill of being 18, a legal adult yet still his little girl in so many ways. She walked down the grand staircase, her heart light, expecting the laughter and chatter of a family gathering. But Jonathan greeted her in the foyer, alone with a gentle smile and eyes shimmering with emotion. "Amara," he said softly, "there's something I want to show you before anyone else." Curious and a little puzzled, she followed him through the house to the garden, the place where so many of their quiet moments had unfolded. The garden was transformed. Strings of tiny lights glimmered in the trees, and roses bloomed in colors more vibrant than she had ever seen. In the center, a bench had been placed, and on it lay a scrapbook, thick and carefully arranged. Jonathan gestured for her to sit. "Open it," he whispered. "It's your story. Our story." Amara's hands trembled as she opened the scrapbook. The first pages were filled with photographs of her as a little girl, shy and nervous, clinging to a stranger who had become her father. Each photo told a story: the day she first arrived at the mansion, the first night she slept safely in her own room, the birthdays and holidays they had celebrated together, the garden where she had hidden when life felt too hard. There were letters, drawings, and notes Jonathan had kept, documenting every small triumph, every tear, every moment of courage she had shown. She turned the pages slowly, absorbing each memory, each word, each proof of love. Tears ran freely down her face as she realized how deeply Jonathan had cherished her from the very beginning. I didn't know you remembered all this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonathan knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "I remember everything," he said. "Every smile, every fear, every victory. You changed my life, Amara. You taught me what it means to love without conditions, to care without limits. And today, on your 18th birthday, I want you to know that no matter where life takes you, I will always be here, proud, protective, and endlessly in awe of the person you have become." Amara buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by the emotion that had been building inside her for years. She realized how much she had relied on his love, how much she had grown because of it, and how deeply she had been shaped by his unwavering belief in her. For the first time, the little girl who had once felt abandoned and unseen felt completely understood, completely cherished. Jonathan continued softly, "Life will challenge you, as it always has. People will judge, doubt, and sometimes hurt you. But remember this: you are strong, brave, and deserving of all the love and happiness the world can offer. And you will always have a home no matter what." Amara looked up at him, eyes glistening with tears and joy. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Amara," Jonathan replied, holding her tightly. More than words can ever say. For a long moment they simply sat together in the garden, surrounded by the soft glow of the lights and the sweet scent of roses. The world outside, with all its challenges, seemed distant and unimportant. In that moment there was only love, trust, and the undeniable bond that had carried them both through years of hardship and hope. It was a simple truth, yet profound. Family is not defined by blood but by heart. And in that garden on her 18th birthday, Amara knew without a doubt that she had been chosen, cherished, and loved in the most extraordinary way. The evening settled over the Whitmore mansion with a quiet serenity, as though the world itself paused to honor the moment. Amara, now fully grown, sat in the garden where so many of her memories had been made. The soft glow of the fairy lights reflected in her eyes, capturing the joy, the struggles, and the love that had brought her here. Today was her 18th birthday, the day she officially became an adult, but for her it was more than that. It was the day she truly understood the depth of the man who had chosen her, fought for her, and never let her feel alone. Jonathan approached, carrying a small box wrapped in simple, elegant paper. He had been quiet all day, letting her enjoy her friends, her laughter, and the sense of accomplishment that came with growing into the young woman she had become. But now he had one final gift, a gift not of wealth or luxury but of memory, meaning, and love. He knelt beside her and placed the box in her hands. "Open it," he said softly. Amara's fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a locket, delicate and timeless. When she opened it, she gasped. Inside were two tiny photographs, one of herself as a little girl, sitting timidly on the steps of the orphanage, and one of her with Jonathan, the two of them laughing together in the garden years ago. Beneath the photos, a small note read, "Chosen then, loved always, forever, my daughter." Tears welled in Amara's eyes as she clutched the locket to her chest. She looked at Jonathan, searching for words, but none came. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as though she could absorb all the love he had given her in a single embrace. Jonathan held her close, feeling the years of struggle, fear, and triumph between them. "Amara," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you've grown into someone extraordinary. I knew it the moment I saw you. I chose you not because I could give you wealth, but because I could give you love. And that love will always be yours. No one can ever take it away." Amara pressed her face against his chest, feeling the warmth and steady heartbeat that had comforted her through sleepless nights and moments of doubt. She realized then that the bond they shared was unshakable. Not just a parent and a child, but two souls who had saved each other. The world might still judge, the past might still whisper, but in this moment, love was louder than all fear. Through the soft glow of the garden lights, friends and family watched quietly, some dabbing their eyes with tissues, unable to contain the emotion that radiated from the pair. Jonathan had given Amara a life, but she had also given him something priceless, a purpose, a connection, and a reminder of what it truly meant to love without conditions. Amara finally pulled back slightly, looking up at Jonathan. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and joy, "for everything. For choosing me, for never giving up, for being my dad." Jonathan smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "No, my dear," he said softly. "Thank you for letting me be your father." for teaching me that love can be the greatest gift of all. For a long moment they simply sat together in the garden, holding hands, watching the stars appear one by one. Every hardship, every tear, every fear had led to this moment, a perfect, undeniable truth that family is chosen, nurtured, and cherished, not always born. And in that quiet night under the sky, with the gentle scent of roses surrounding them, Amara realized something she had long hoped to feel. She was not just loved. She was home. Jonathan held her close once more, whispering, "Happy birthday, my daughter. Always remember you are my heart, my hope, and my greatest joy." Amara leaned into him, feeling the weight of his words and the fullness of their journey. She knew beyond doubt that no matter what the world held for her, she would always carry the love of the man who had chosen her, and that love would never fade. And in that moment, everyone who witnessed it felt the same truth. Love, courage, and choice can change lives in ways that are unimaginable and sometimes unbelievable.